Margaret Campbell, Duchess of Argyle, kept a secret in a locked drawer at home. When her husband finally cracked it, the contents shocked not only him, but the whole world. Margaret Wigham's youth predetermined her stormy adult life. Born into the family of a Scottish millionaire, she grew up in New York and studied at the most prestigious private schools in the country, among the best and wealthiest heirs and heiresses of her time. However, scandals attracted her from a young age. By the age of 15, men were crazy about her amazing beauty, which, apparently, was a legacy of her Scottish roots. Margaret quickly got used to such attention. In the summer of 1928, Margaret attracted the attention of an older guy, 18-year-old David Niven, who later became a famous Hollywood actor. The story of their romance is worthy of a movie. Margaret and David met on vacation on the Isle of Wight, where they spent the summer with their parents. While the adults were busy with their own affairs, the young people were able to retire and get to know each other on a completely new level. Despite the fact that this was Margaret's first experience with a man, this one time turned out to be a huge problem for her. A few months later, she found out that she was pregnant. In 1928, being an unmarried mother was a terrible shame, and Margaret had to take drastic measures. She told her parents about everything that happened between her and Niven, as well as about the pregnancy. One of the maids of the family recalled that a real hell broke out in the house. The father reacted especially violently to the incident. However, after the shock, Margaret's parents knew exactly what to do. Their family was respected and could not allow the slightest hint of shame. Soon Margaret was sent to London, where a secret abortion operation was performed in one of the hospitals. This story was so secret that even Margaret herself did not mention it in her memoirs, published almost 50 years later. But 2 years later, Margaret returned to secular society. In 1930, her parents introduced her at court as a debutante. This meant that she was ready for marriage. By that time, her beauty had just blossomed, and she quickly received the title of Debutante of the Year. But with so many fans, problems were inevitable for Margaret. Although she was looking for marriage and stability, her behavior behind the scenes suggested the opposite. Among her fans were such influential people as Prince Ali Khan and the brave racing driver Glenn Kingston. Although Prince Ali inundated Margaret with gifts and attention, her heart was given to Kingston. Despite the fact that he was the most dangerous choice. The pilot was married and had a small child, but this did not stop Margaret, and her reputation as a modern Helen of Troy only strengthened. However, their romance was interrupted by a tragedy. In the spring of 1931, Margaret learned that Glenn Kingston had died in a terrible plane crash. When his plane crashed during a storm, Margaret was completely heartbroken. Her reaction to the tragedy was unbearable. Soon after, she hastily became engaged to Charles Greville, Earl of Warwick, but at the same time accepted the offer of another man, the heir to the publishing empire of Max Eaton. However, instead of marrying one of them, she left both of them and tied her life with businessman and avid golfer Charles Sweeney. This marriage has become a real nightmare for her. Despite the fact that Margaret got pregnant very easily in her youth, she had 8 miscarriages in her marriage with Sweeney. When, finally, she managed to carry the baby, a new disaster happened. Her daughter was stillborn. Despite this, Margaret did not give up and gave birth to 2 more children with Sweeney by 1940. But her previous losses have left deep scars. In 1943, Margaret's life changed again. One day, visiting a doctor on Bondon Street, Margaret fell from a height of 12 meters into the elevator shaft as a result of an accident. From that moment on, her life changed forever. Fortunately, she was found alive, which in itself seemed like a miracle. However, there were interesting details. Doctors assumed that she grabbed the elevator cable, which probably saved her life. Her nails were torn and bloody. After 33 stitches on her head and several days of recovery, Margaret was allowed to return home. But her husband immediately noticed the changes in his wife. She became more impulsive and suffered from uncontrollable desire, which may have been the beginning of the end of their marriage. One of her achievements, of course in quotation marks, is the breakup of her engagement with Texas banker Joseph Thomas, as well as a relationship with the Metropolitan Museum of Art curator Theodore Rousseau. However, these men were only preludes to meeting the one who ruined her life. Margaret met Irina Duncan Campbell, Duke of Argyle. He turned out to be a real romantic, with a gloomy face and a rude disposition. He had a gloomy Inverary castle that perfectly reflected his character. At that time, Ian already had 2 marriages under his belt, and none of them ended happily. He was haunted by the trauma of being in captivity during World War II, which made him prone to alcoholism, gambling, and drug addiction. Both of his previous wives claimed that he had abused them. But instead of fleeing, Margaret threw herself into his arms and married him in March of 1951, becoming the Duchess of Argyle. From the outside, it seemed that she had achieved everything: a brilliant wedding, a title, and an influential husband. She was still considered one of the most stylish women in the world, but behind the facade, she was already sinking into a nightmare. Marrying the Duke was like a deal with the devil. As soon as the signature on the marriage contract dried up, he began to appropriate the money that Margaret brought to the union to restore her family castle. For him, she was just a money bag. At the same time, Margaret was beginning to lose control of herself. Even her friends noted her oddities. She is completely devoid of a sense of humor and called herself a dummy. She cared more about appearance than anything else. A few months after the wedding, she realized that she had made a mistake. Despite her beauty, for the Duke, she was just another wife whom he could bully and humiliate. In addition to this, she had difficulty conceiving a child, which only made the situation worse. In desperation, Margaret decided on a dastardly plan. She started spreading rumors that the Duke's sons from his previous marriages were born out of the law, trying to strengthen her position. But her plan failed. Margaret realized that money does not bring happiness, but it can help to find a child. In one of her plans, she allegedly planned to install a child and marry him off as her own, thus making him the rightful heir of the Duke. It was a desperate decision that only highlighted her confusion and instability. The Duke always suspected that his wife was behaving frivolously, but had no proof. However, when Margaret began to stay late and move away from him, Ying resorted to drastic measures. He installed a wiretap in her car to constantly know where she was. But this turned out to be insufficient for the Duke, and he decided to go further, which led to the collapse of their marriage. In the late 1950s, the patience of N. Campbell, Duke of Argyle, broke down. He noticed that Margaret kept a locked drawer in the house, and this fueled his suspicion. While she was in New York, the Duke called a locksmith to pick the lock, but what he found inside shocked him. As her first husband later recalled, Margaret's fall into the elevator shaft changed her personality. And the open documents confirmed this. Among the contents of the box were incriminating Polaroids, in which Margaret was captured in intimate relationships with men who were definitely not her husband. Her face was often hidden in the pictures, but the Duke easily recognized her by her favorite pearl necklace. Upon learning of the betrayal, the Duke of Argyle immediately began divorce proceedings. In his statements, he accused his wife of cheating with 88 men. This caused a real scandal in the press, and the photos that became public domain led to Margaret being nicknamed the Dirty Duchess. Her attempt to blame the Duke in return was unsuccessful. She claimed that he cheated on her with her stepmother Jane Corby Wig, but on the day of the trial, she could not find a witness, and had to drop this accusation. During the 4 years of litigation, the press tirelessly followed the case, and public opinion was increasingly inclined not in favor of Margaret. The climax was a scandalous picture where the Duchess was kneeling in front of a man whose face was not visible. The media tried to find out his identity, and among the possible lovers were British Defence Minister Duncan Sands and actor Douglas Fairbanks Jr., although many believed that the headless man. This is a sense, later research has shown that it was probably Fairbanks. Margaret never revealed the names of her lovers, preferring to remain silent. However, Judge Lord Wheatley, who heard their case, was extremely conservative. He harshly condemned Margaret, calling her a completely dissolute and immoral woman. This completely destroyed her reputation. Now she was a free woman, but freedom was given to her at a high price, her status in society was lost forever. But her name was already completely disgraced. Despite the fact that Margaret never revealed the names of her lovers, she found a way to make money from her scandal, which looked very awkward. She began organizing paid tours of her home on Upper Grosvenor Street, where her ex-husband first discovered those incriminating photos. It would seem that the limit of humiliation was reached, but Margaret continued to lose the remnants of dignity. Over time, her bank account could no longer cover her lavish habits, and she was forced to leave her infamously unknown home. First moving to the Grosvenor House Hotel, and then, at the insistence of her children and her first husband, Charles Sonny, a modest apartment. By the end of the 80s, Margaret had found a new way to make money. She began appearing on television shows. She even made a cameo on the talk show Author Dark, where she discussed horse racing. However, in the middle of the broadcast, Margaret left the show, saying that she was very tired and wanted to sleep. Although she was already in her 70s, and this behavior could be explained by age. This case was another evidence of her deteriorating health. By the early 90s, Margaret could no longer take care of herself, and her children assigned her to a nursing home. There the last tragedy awaited her. One day she fell in the bathroom, breaking her neck. Unlike the elevator accident, this time Margaret was too weak to cope. She died on July 25, 1993, and was buried next to her first husband, Charles Pig, who died just 4 months before her. Her legacy, however, lives on. In 2022, Amazon released the miniseries A Very British Scandal, based on her scandalous lawsuit with her husband. It can be assumed that the dirty Duchess would like such attention. Despite her notorious reputation, Margaret Campbell has always been obsessed with aristocratic norms, and often talked about how to properly demonstrate herself in society. As she once said, always a poodle, just a poodle, and 3 strands of pearls. Together they are the most important things in life. If you liked this video, please like it, subscribe to our channel, write comments, see you again.